we estimate that about 38% of the food in the US food supply does not get eaten. That's equivalent to over 80 million cars worth of greenhouse gases when you look at the footprint of that. And so, yeah, it's just a staggering amount and, value almost $450 billion worth of food.
Hello, food chain. This is Sharon Chitun, and I'm a food tech junkie and innovation nerd who loves a good story. This podcast combines all of my favorite vices into a deep dive about the problems our food system faces and the visionary people working on solutions. Today, we're thrilled to have leading food system expert Dana Gunders, the president of ReFed, joining us. Dana has been a pivotal force in redefining how we think about and manage food waste. Under her leadership, ReFed has not only highlighted the issue, but also driven impactful, scalable solutions across the agri-food value chain. Today, she's here to share her insights on how we can turn the food waste crisis into an opportunity for innovation and efficiency. Stay tuned as we explore these strategies that could transform our food system into one that is more resilient, sustainable, and equitable. Are you ready? Here we go. Hi, Dana. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm very excited to talk to you and touch on such an important subject. But before we dive into the conversation, could you tell our listeners a little bit about you, how you got started, and how you arrived at ReFed?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been working on this food waste issue for about 15 years now, which it seems crazy to me to be able to say. And it started for me back in 2009, 2010. I was working on a sustainable agriculture project at the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. And I was put in charge of the waste program. And so I started and that was really at the time meant to look at plastic in food.
Oh.
So there's a lot of plastics in farming, irrigation pipes and other things. And what do you do with that waste? And so, I was put in charge of that group. And as I started to research it, I came across numbers on how much food was going to waste. And I went, wait a minute. This is crazy, right? Like here we are trying to get these farmers to be 5 or 10% more efficient with their water or pesticides or fertilizers, but eating almost half of that food. And it struck me, I had studied energy efficiency in college. So it struck me as a real parallel to energy efficiency, but for the food sector. And so that really is like what lit my fire on the topic. And I started to dig into it more. And I would speak to these farmers and say, hey, does this sound right? I read this paper in this place. And they would be like, yeah, that sounds about right. 40% of food go to waste. Yeah, that sounds about right. And no big deal. And I just went crazy, right? Because I just felt like somebody has to do something about this. So ultimately, that led me to write a report in 2012 that sort of unexpectedly got a lot of press and really, in some ways, sparked a dialogue around this topic of food waste for the US. And I've been working on the topic ever since. ReFed came along a few years later as part of work that was really done by a man named Jesse Fink's Impact Investment Office. Jesse was one of the founders of Priceline, and he had sold it and had an impact investment kind of family office. And they came across this issue of food waste, and they were talking about what would be impactful. And ultimately, that led to the idea of coming out with a report that would really analyze solutions. Because at the time, while people were starting to wake up to the problem, there was nothing to really guide anyone on what to do first, what had the biggest bang for buck or anything. And so ReFed came out with their report in 2016. I was involved. I was on the advisory council, I think, for the report. And then that report got a lot of traction and really led to the organization starting. And throughout that, I was on the steering committee. Once it became an organization, I was on the board, and I stepped in as executive director in late 2019.
Wow. And well, Can you give us a little bit of background? What do you guys do at Refed?
Sure. Yeah. Refed is a nonprofit, primarily domestic in the US. And we really focus on reducing the amount of food that goes to waste through evidence based solutions. So we're really looking for that evidence. We're the only nonprofit that's entirely dedicated to reducing food loss and waste. And we focus on providing data and insight on the topic to really act as that foundation of analysis. And then we work with capital providers to bring more capital into the space, as well as just practitioners. So we host a network of over 1,000 people working on the topic. We host an annual summit. And as of late, we've really also started to grow out a business initiative that we work on. So really trying to give food businesses the tools they need to get started on the issue.
And I guess as a national expert on food waste, you have significantly impacted and influenced this area. What are some of the key milestones that you and Refed have achieved under your leadership?
Yeah, well, I will start with my favorite because, as I said, I've been working on this a long time and I really have never been able to point to real progress. Of course, people love to ask, how are we doing? Are we making progress? You've been working on this a long time. And it's always been really difficult because we haven't had progress to point to. And there's a project we work with on the West Coast,
Mhm.
and it involves over 50% of market share for all of grocery on the West Coast. So we have participants like Walmart and Kroger and Albertsons and some of the more regional grocers like Raley's and New Seasons. And they all report data into us, and this year, for the first time, we've been collecting data from them for 4 years. And we were able to say that from 2019 to 2022, over that kind of 3 year time period, those grocers reduced their overall amount of surplus food they have by 25%.
Wow.
That was a huge progress because by reducing the overall amount of surplus food, that means that they're actually preventing. We talk a lot on this topic about prevention, and kind of the parallel to the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra in plastics. But like, let's first not have too much, and then if we have it, let's figure out what to do with it. Um, and so this is really the first time that we have progress at scale to point to, especially on the prevention side of things. So that's been a huge, huge milestone for us.
That's amazing. And I guess this is different than the sort of insights engines and the data utilization tool.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I could point to things we have done before that, right? But it's really hard to find like results. Our insights engine takes, over 80 different data sets and combines them to create a picture of how much surplus food. We talk about surplus food because it's not waste until you waste it, right? But how much surplus food there is in each of the sectors. For a lot of those, we're not really able to capture progress very well because we're not getting direct data. We're using kind of estimates of about how much might go to waste in produce on a farm or something like that. In grocery, because of this project, we actually do get real time data. And so we are able to capture that progress.
Wow. So what is like the actual situation in the US on food waste?
Yeah, we have a lot of it. That's the actual situation.
Yes, just looking at the plates.
Yeah, you don't have to look very far. And if this isn't something you work on after you listen to this, you'll see it everywhere. Like all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, we're throwing food out all over the place,
Wow.
which is what makes it a challenging issue. I mean, in terms of kind of big numbers, we estimate that about 38% of the food in the US food supply does not get eaten. That's equivalent to over 80 million cars worth of greenhouse gases. And when you look at the footprint of that, and So yeah, it's just a staggering amount and, value almost $450 billion worth
Yeah,
of food.
which is a staggering amount. And so, I mean, there's a lot of talk, and obviously, people like myself and many founders and investors and organizations, work to find solutions and to advocate for solutions. What are some of the key innovations that you have seen over the years in food waste reduction?
Yeah, we're seeing a ton of innovation. I think it's a really exciting kind of trial and error period. And I should mention that we do on our insights engine, we have an analysis of solutions. And so we have 42 solutions we've analyzed for how well they work and how much it would cost and how much it would achieve if we were to roll it out across the whole country. And I would say when you look at that list, there are a few that stand out as really, even from when we first came out with that, well, as in a report in 2016 and then on the Insights engine in 2021, um, that have really there are a few solutions that have really kind of gotten taken up, right? They're doing really well. I would say a couple of them are in the data space. So we have one that is really about we call it enhanced demand planning, but it's really about using AI to forecast better,
Yeah.
forecast your sales better and move food around better. So you have a Fresh as an example of a company that has done really well in that space. Another area is apps, right? These like sale apps. And I call them like the modern day 50% off sticker, right? It's kind of like a new approach. Both grocery stores and restaurants forever have had day old baked goods or, 50% off. But now there's this ability through apps like Flash Food, like Too Good to Go, with Olio doing this a little bit. So more coming into the space. But this ability to just mark down product in a sophisticated way sometimes, right? Like through, it's not just 50% off, the price is changing at different times and really blast that flash sale out to a lot of people. So those last minute apps are doing great. We're also seeing kind of imaging solutions that are interesting. So actually, Walmart announced something they're rolling out that is kind of an AI solution, but it's actually like looking at the fruit, right, and evaluating its quality
Yeah.
through imaging. So I think that's a pretty interesting one as well. And then I have to say, some of the progress we're seeing is super old school, right? Like one of our best success stories on the West Coast is about employee education
Yeah.
and asking employees what the best solutions are and one of the employees at Bob's Red Mill rolled out a project where they did this whole thing with their employees and asked for suggestions. And one of the suggestions was to tighten a screw more often on one of the lines. And it saved 70% of the food that was going to waste on that line.
Wow. That's a lot. It's a lot. And that brings me sort of to there are so many questions. So obviously, I think we can't go anywhere without behavioral change and that awareness and that education that should start very, very young, at least, So since we talked about this, I guess, what are you guys doing or what strategies has Refed employed to enhance that public awareness and sort of that community, I guess, participation in food waste reduction?
Yeah, this is so important, right? I mean, when we look at our big pie chart of food waste, the largest wedge is coming from all 330 million of us in our homes cleaning out our fridges and, scraping our plates into the trash. So consumers are the largest source of food waste. Refed, we actually don't do any direct to consumer education. I think it's something that I've actually been involved with in the past, and I know what a big project it is. It's so important. We need it. We don't have what we need right now. When I was at NRDC, we actually partnered with the Ad Council on a big public campaign called Save the Food. You can still go to the website, savethefood.com. It has great kind of tips and tricks and lots of information. And I actually wrote a book called The Waste Free Kitchen Handbook that was also aimed at consumers. And I think it's really important. It's a very long game, right? And that campaign ran for, it took a year to create, it ran for 2 years. And I think had it run for a significantly longer, it would be starting to achieve that. But these big social changes take decades when you look at smoking or even getting people to use their seat belts. And, one of the really interesting things the ad council said to us as we were designing that campaign was after they'd done their research, they said, a lot of the campaigns we work on are very single action, right? Like buckle your seatbelts, take the GED, or even adopt a kid, right? But it's kind of like this one thing. Whereas food waste, they said, it's complicated to message around because you can get to it in so many different ways. It's like live a healthy lifestyle. You can do yoga or you can go running. Similarly, if you're going to, stop wasting food, you can be really good about buying stuff or you can be really good about cooking it, or there's different strategies. So that's what we found. It's really necessary. I think what we are seeing right now is more interest by the federal government. So they just put out a draft strategy on this topic, and they did include a consumer campaign as part of that. And so I would not be surprised if we sort of get one up and running soon. Aside from that, there's still a lot that can be done. And so what we do at Refed is work in what we call the consumer environment, right? How can we change the environment around consumers to help them waste less, even if they don't know it?
Mhm.
So that's things like, we partner with the Zero Food Waste Coalition to try to have the date labels on food be standardized and really come up with a better solution there that's not so confusing. We are looking at projects through that West Coast project around how do we play with flexible portion sizes
Yeah.
so that if you don't want a huge burrito, you don't have to get one, right? Like you can get a smaller. So there are things I think that can be done around consumers that can help as well.
Yeah, because I guess to me, every school should have that as part of the curriculum. It's such a big, not just food waste, right? I mean, climate, food systems in general, because the effect that bad habits have has these humongous impacts on, our, for example, our climate. And so, how does food waste reduction tie into that sort of broader climate change policies? And what are the potential impacts of an improved food waste management on greenhouse gas emissions? You sort of mentioned that before with, one staggering point of data, but it can go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I would love to. And before I answer that, I'd like to just point out that you mentioned schools, and WWF has been rolling out a really great program in schools around food waste. So if you want that in your school, check that out. But yeah, I love addressing this climate question because if you look at, for instance, Project Drawdown, they've analyzed 93 solutions to climate change, and literally number one on their list is reduce food waste, which
Yeah.
does not naturally compute, right? It doesn't really make sense for most people. So I like to break down the connection because I don't think it's obvious. There are really three reasons why food waste has such a big climate impact. The first is the easiest to understand, and that's that when food goes to landfills, it rots and creates methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. And in fact, landfills are the third largest source of methane in the US. And food, the EPA just last year came out with a report saying food is 59% of landfill methane. So the vast majority of that methane is coming from food. That's the first connection. The second is everything it takes to grow, harvest, store, transport, cool, cook food and get it to our tables. There's huge energy demands in that. And other greenhouse gases, actually, from refrigerants and fertilizer interactions in the soil, et cetera. So all of that, if you consider we're doing that sort of 30+% more than we need to be, right? It's all for naught and creates a portion of that greenhouse gas footprint, actually a much bigger portion than the methane from landfills.
Mhm.
And then the third and largest reason that there's such a connection is land use. We are looking ahead at a future where the UN predicts we'll need 50% more food in 2050 than we had in 2010 for the future population. And the question is, where is that food going to come from? Are we going to cut down more rainforests and convert native grasslands to grow more food, or are we going to use the food we're already growing? And so those land use pressures, they do primarily, even today, when you look at deforestation, the primary reasons are beef, soy to feed cattle, and palm oil, right? And so really kind of reducing the demand in theory should help with that land use, but it is a very complex uh, issue as well. So
Very,
it's kind of a macro connection there.
yeah, and very complex one, as we see here in Europe or what happened in Florida. It seems like we don't really connect the fact that most of our land, our arable land, is used to feed cattle, and we're talking about food systems, and obviously we're talking about food waste. Uh, and all of this has a price tag, and this is what sort of drives me crazy because, at least from a government side, is like healthcare, like what we're spending in the long run. If you don't address it, right off the bat, it's much bigger than trying to prevent, right? Prevention. What is the economic or social impacts and ramifications of food waste, and obviously what goes around food waste, and how does reducing food waste contribute to food security and economic stability?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, but I think it sort of starts with some basic principles, right? So when we if you're our when if in your household or if you're a company, when you throw food out, you threw the cost of that food out, right? So it's not a smart economic thing to do. At the same time, if we're realistic about it, there are some other things at play. One is that there are some other things if you're running a business that are more expensive. Labor, real estate, right? And so if you're maximizing your sort of business equation, you're not necessarily maximizing it for food use. You might be maximizing it for instance, labor. And that can result in waste. So and then the other sort of reality we have to be clear about is that while it saves money to waste less in your own four walls, it actually is better for you if anyone downstream wastes food because you sell more, right? So I think those are some of the basic economic principles that are kind of at play and that we're up against. And it's also very inexpensive to throw food out. Like
Mhm.
waste is not an expensive thing. So with that, I mean, the size if you're running a really tight business, you can save a lot of money by wasting less food, right? And we're seeing that. I mean, it depends on the type of business, but anywhere from a 5 to 1 return to some might say 7 to 1. I've seen 14 to 1 as an estimate, right? And so there really are true economic gains to be made. At the biggest scale, we're looking at we estimate that we would need an $18 billion investment annually to fully implement all 42 of the solutions we've analyzed. That's kind of the biggest, estimate because it assumes every restaurant, every grocer, every household, right? Every city and everyone implements all the solutions. So it's kind of big. But with that, we are seeing that there is a 5 to 1 return on that. It's not always to the person who had to lay out the money, however, right? So some of that return comes in the form of consumers saving money in their homes by wasting less food. As an example, we might want a manufacturer to change the packaging design on a product in a way that helps consumers waste less food. But the consumers are the ones that are going to really save the money in the end from it. So, that's kind of the economics, the numbers. like I said, I think, we estimate it's $444 billion worth of food going to waste across the economy. For an individual household, it's about, if you're four people in a household, you could estimate about $2,700 that you're spending. So it's significant money. When it comes to food security, I think there's a little bit of a complicated relationship between food waste and food security, right?
Mm.
At the highest level, we produce enough food in the world today to feed everyone, but we don't, right? And we don't because of poverty, because of distribution challenges, just inequities around the system. And so we have over 800 million people in the world who are food insecure. If a business gets much more efficient with their food use, they may actually have less food to donate in theory. But what we see happen in reality is that when businesses come to this issue, the first thing they do is improve their food donations. And so we see kind of a curve where they will donate, significantly more food. And then they'll go, wait a minute, why do we have so much extra food? It makes it much more visible. And then that will come down a little bit, but they still will do a lot more food donation. And so that's kind of the upside, is that wasting less food can provide more food into the emergency food system. It won't solve hunger, but it can kind of help with that band-aid of providing more food into the system itself. Our
That-
estimate that this big model of if we rolled everything out estimate says that it would add 4 billion meals in the US to the emergency food system.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And there's the U.S. food waste factor. Can you discuss its objective? You tell us a little bit about it and then expected outcomes from its sort of target, measure, act framework and overall work.
Well, the US Food Waste Pack is new. It is modeled after the project we have on the West Coast, which I've mentioned already, and that's called the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment. And so it follows a target, measure, act framework. So at first, in order to join, all of the companies must commit to a goal of reducing their food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. They also must commit to reporting data into this kind of pooled commitment. And what we do is we collect that data and we report it out jointly, so that I can tell you that on the West Coast, those retailers reduced their waste by 25% over those years. And then the third piece is to act. And that to help them kind of figure out what to do, we have a variety of projects. We have pilot projects where we've piloted things, like a fresh, for instance, in that enhanced demand planning pilot. And we have seen retailers roll that kind of thing out. Albertsons rolled a fresh out across the country, for example. So we do pilots. We have working groups that work through different issues. We have a food donation working group. We have a dairy working group. We have a produce working group. And then some of those working groups will do projects. So one of the projects they did on the West Coast last year was to look very deeply into the supply chains of strawberries and of potatoes, to really understand, like, where is the waste happening and where could we work together as the biggest retailers in the country to make a difference on that. They found that strawberries have a lot of waste that just never gets harvested. And so they are now, and some of that is because of size. And they are now looking at collectively creating a new SKU, they call it, kind of a new item line to essentially offer smaller strawberries and harvest those strawberries. So that would be one example of something. The pact, like I said, is new to really, there was a lot of excitement over the West Coast. And so we, felt and a lot of interest by non-West Coast grocers. Hold is one, for instance, to participate. So we now have it nationally. I think it's still kind of getting a little bit organized. We haven't had reporting for the first year. I don't want to under convey the challenge of getting the measurement and reporting part right too. So we're sort of in that, but we're really hopeful there's great energy and a lot of new companies who we think will be coming online soon. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, and then hopefully, how does an initiative like that then can potentially shape policy?
That's a great question. And I think we're still, I would say, understanding the appetite. There's no policy requirement for the project, right? But we have on the West Coast as well offered involvement. So, for instance, we have an initiative to standardize the date labels for food. We wanted a company sign, a sign on letter. And so we'll circulate that to the companies. And we do have Albertsons and Kroger signing on to some of those things. And so I think it at least gives us a vehicle to have those conversations. And I think in a way where we've built a lot of trust already. And so we're not going to bring some crazy thing that is really going to harm the companies or, I think we're looking for solutions. And I have to say, it's one thing I love about this topic is it's not super conflict ridden, right? Like no one's really against it. I think it just is, it's invisible. It's not always high priority. And so it gets lost. But when you get people's attention, you can really start to see progress and see it quickly. And for a lot of these folks, save money at the same time, which for sustainability managers in companies is not always the case with everything they're doing. So in that sense, it can be popular. But so on the policy side, most of the things we're looking for is more support from the government, more funding, standardizing date labels, which actually makes companies' life easier because they don't have to track it across 50 states. So it's tended to be things that are they're amenable to.
Got it. And you said that the one of the goals is by a significant 50% reduction by 2030. What kind of challenges do you foresee in achieving that goal, and how will you address them? Like, what's I guess, the concerns and solutions to get that done, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, first, just a clarification on the goal, because importantly, the international community that created the goal and then the EPA sort of followed in its definition, and its definition does not include composting or anaerobic digestion. So if you have food that was going to landfill and now you put a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of money into sending it to compost, it actually does not technically count towards the sort of US and international goal. The goal is to actually cut all of the food that is going to compost or anaerobic digestion or landfill, all of that food, that number in half, which is very challenging, much more challenging than if you could count the compost part, right?
Mhm.
I was not super optimistic on that goal until we saw this progress from the retailers on the West Coast who have made, just incredible strides and really changed my mind about the realistic potential of companies reaching that goal. So what it shows me is that just putting a more attention to it can make a big difference. Will they hit it? I don't know. Right. But I think that, gosh, if they're 30%, 40%, like that's still a
Wow.
huge, yeah, it's still a lot. It has huge benefits. And that's true for us in our homes too. Right. Like I waste food. Gosh, I have two kids. Like we are not perfect over here, but we try really hard. And, I think that sort of perfect being the enemy of the good can be a challenge on any issue. And in this one, it really is a very direct linear benefit you get. Like you eat one thing of leftovers and you have avoided that food going to your landfill and creating that methane very directly. And so it doesn't have to be perfect in your home and for these companies. If they don't make the 50%, but they make the 40%, I'm still happy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it takes a village. So I guess with your like latest estimates and all the ongoing challenges happening in the US, what are some of the immediate actions that stakeholders should prioritize based on your findings to do better?
Yeah, well, I think you really have to look around your own sphere of influence, right? Like we just said, we all eat. So that's, I know maybe a little bit cliche, but true. And, somewhere we can all start. Um, Beyond that, we all sort of host parties, organize events, have a wedding, whatever it is. And I think there are opportunities there. So it is hard to generalize for stakeholders overall. I think for stakeholders overall, I would just say look around. What can you do? We have a ton of resources on our website for people who are more specifically involved in the food economy in terms of if you are a restaurant, what can you do? If you are a investor, what can you do? Right? Where are the most popular topics? We host an investor, like a funders circle
Yeah.
for both investors and foundations. And so we really try to give them more specific opportunities. We circulate, actually, this is great for your audience. We circulate funding opportunities to those investors and foundations every month so that if, you're a company and you're raising a series A or whatever it is, we will put that on and let them at least know about it. And so, yeah, I know that's a broad answer, but it's a broad questions.
Well, it's cool. So, I mean, you are very extremely passionate, obviously, about the topic. You know, I- what is your number one driver, and what does your day look like?
Yeah.
Busy, other than busy.
Right. It's funny. I started working on this topic before like the climate connection was really strong. And I look back now because now for me, it really is the climate, the potential it has around mitigating emissions that drives me. And I look back and I go, gosh, what drove me then? Right. But I don't think it was that different because they're also, it's water use, it's fertilizer and pesticide use. Agriculture is a huge just resource user. Right. And so I think all of that does drive me on the topic. My day, what does my day look like? It's a lot of phone Zoom calls is what my day looks like, to be honest. It's never the same. I mean, I am so lucky that, sometimes people are like, gosh, you worked on this for so long. Like, aren't you sick of it? And um, I think what keeps it interesting is that food waste is not one issue. We talk about it as if it's one thing, but it is very different on the farm than it is in restaurants, and it's different for tomatoes than it is for beef. So it's really about fixing the whole food system, right? And where where we sit on this topic, it's like on an average day, I might talk to the USDA and then talk to a startup that has some really cool solution and then work with my team to really work through like where should we be focusing our research like in the next year. And then uh hop on a call with a food business or something like that. Or so it's really varied, and it's been exciting to see the increase in not attention so much, but just like enthusiasm, I guess, because I really feel like this is a solvable problem, but we need a lot of people to make it truly solved, right? And it's not going to take one person sitting here having a lot of Zoom calls. It's like it's so dispersed that we really need a lot of different brilliant minds and passion aimed towards it. And we're starting to see that. So I think that's really exciting.
That's amazing. So this is a question I ask everyone. If you had a magic wand and you could right away solve or do one thing, what would you do and why? So
Yeah. I mean, I think if I had a magic wand that could do one thing, it would be to shift our culture, our sort of cultural mindset around food waste, because, that's really behind it's behind not seeing it in our own lives It's behind businesses and the way they operate, right? And a lot of the waste they produce is to serve our cultural priorities, which are convenience, choice, speed, right? And so I think if waste were sitting alongside those, we'd have a more explicit conversation about the trade-offs there.
Got it. And um, what would you say or advise? I would say whether a young entrepreneur or a young activist that looks at what you're doing and says, "Gosh, I want to be just like her." What would you say to him or her?
Well, I think if you're excited to work on this topic, getting involved in sort of the existing structure of food businesses or the food industry is really useful because, a supply chain manager at a, X food company may not sound like an exciting position to you, but actually that's the person that everyone who's quote working on food waste is trying to, you know, get to do something, right? Yeah. And so some of these more straight up functional positions in the food industry are really powerful. If if you get into those roles and you learn the existing system, like that's how you can make a real difference towards sustainability. You don't need sustainability in the title. You don't need food waste in the title. You know, I think in fact those without food waste or sustainability in the title are sometimes the most important.
Got it. That's a great answer. So before I ask you like my two final questions, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
No, but I would maybe just add on to that question is to just say we are seeing so many exciting innovations. And I just think there's still a lot of new thinking that can be brought to the topic. So that's exciting as well.
And speaking of like solutions and innovations, obviously every day like there's something really cool, but we're also in a moment in time where like funding is not what it used to be. I would say in a way it's also good. We're in a little bit of a bubble, but what do we need to do? Because obviously, food waste is such a huge issue, and we should get investors on board and entrepreneurs to keep on innovating and companies to then pilot or uh, include those innovations and solutions into their everyday operations. So, what do you think is what do we need to do better, or what's missing to really strengthen the innovation circuit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we are seeing funding on this issue sort of follow the broader trends, but I would say that from where I sit, it feels like there are a lot of interested investors and interested foundations, and they are just looking for really good, solid projects to invest in that kind of have a clear logic flow and theory of change, right? With solid entrepreneurs and the infrastructure of the organization in good shape to invest in. I think, I mean, I hear sometimes that they're struggling to find the right projects. So I think there is appetite to invest in this. And the more we can offer up just really strong opportunities, the more investment we'll see.
Right. And before, obviously, we talked about the insight engine and digital tools. That is on your website, correct?
Yes. So you can find all of that at refed.org. If you want to get really into the data, and there's a big old button that says, go to the insights engine, and that's where you can dive in quite deeply.
One. Thank you so much. It's been great having you here on with us.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate the invitation and yeah, look forward to continuing it.
Me too. Thanks. Want to deep dive into food innovation? subscribe to the Food Tech Junkies series. Tune in and listen to the industry's champions, whose mission is to reinvent our future by collaborating and disrupting the status quo as a way to rebalance our planet and our daily lives. For more great food and ag tech content, visit our website at www.edibleplanetVentures.com, and don't forget to follow us on social media.